excitement that I have the opportunity to introduce our discussion speaker, Dr. Janet E. Smith. Janet Smith holds the Father Michael J. McGivney Chair of Life and Ethics at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit. She is a visiting scholar at St. Paul Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota for the fall of 2008. She's the author of Humana Vitae, A Generation Later, editor of Why Humana Vitae Was Right, a reader. She has 2 new books, one on bioethics entitled Life Issues, Medical Choices, Questions and Answers for Catholics, co-authored by Chris Kaiser. She also has a book entitled The Right to Privacy. She speaks nationally and internationally on the Catholic teachings on sexuality and on bioethics. She's serving a second term as a consultor to the Pontifical Council for the Family, She received an honorary doctorate in Christian ethics from the University of Steubenville and the St. Thomas Aquinas Award from Ave Maria University. Over 1 million copies of her talk, Contraception, Why Not?, have been distributed. Professor Smith has a new series of talks entitled Sexual Common Sense. The series includes a new updated version of Contraception, Why Not?, as well as 11 additional talks on sexual issues and bioethical issues. The series is available from mycatholicfaith.org, and there's also a table upstairs here at the conference center that they can also be obtained at. In addition, we'd like to request that no photographs be taken during the talk. Professor Smith would be happy to stand for pictures and talk afterwards. If you could please help me welcome Dr. Smith.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm back in my own stomping grounds. I taught at Notre Dame for 9 years, a lot of years ago, and it's changed a lot over that period of time. It's really great to be back. I'm doing some work on John Paul II, actually, and Humana Vitae, and all the influence he had on it. And this talk is going to go through some of that. And a lot of it starts with his book, Love and Responsibility. And there's a phrase in Love and Responsibility that I think is a key to all of John Paul II's teaching on sexual ethics, and that is the phrase conscious parenthood. Good. And if you're wanting a longer version of it, fuller version, there's an article forthcoming in the either the next or next after that volume of Nova et Vetera that comes out of Ave Maria University, and the title is Conscious Parenthood. John Paul II developed his thinking on moral matters, not only from his great study of philosophy and theology, but he was one who called a great deal upon human experience. And this is his own statement about his early thinking about sexual issues and where a lot of his thoughts came from. He talks about his early priesthood, and he said, this relationship between thought and life, theology and pastoral care is really crucial. If I look at my own experience, I can easily see how my work with young people in the university chaplaincy at Krakow helped me in my meditation on fundamental aspects of the Christian life. He spent an enormous amount of time with young people, kayaking with them, camping with them, preparing them for marriage, and a great deal of his insights came through that experience. He said, daily life with the young, the opportunity to guide them in their joys and efforts, and their desire to live to the full the vocation to which the Lord called them, helped me to understand ever more deeply the truth that the human being grows and matures in love, that is, in the gift of himself, and then in giving himself, he receives in exchange the possibility of his own fulfillment. So he draws very much upon this notion that we're meant to make gifts of ourselves. We're going to see that a great deal of this notion of a gift to yourself includes the gift of, in the marital relationship, is the gift of helping the other person become a parent, and that you're becoming a parent with that person. So a large part of the gift of self is really the gift of parenthood. He says, and this is him going on actually from what he just said. He said, one of the loftiest expressions of this principle of self-gift is found in marriage, which is the wise and provident institution of God, the Creator, whose purpose was to establish in man his loving design. And as a consequence, husband and wife, through the mutual gift of themselves, which is specific and exclusive to them alone, seek to develop that kind of personal union in which they complement one another in order to cooperate with God in the generation and education of new lives. This is going to be a supplementary theme, that spouses in becoming parents are cooperating with God, right? They're becoming, he's going to use, in fact, the phrase co-creators with God, right? So these two concepts, conscious parenthood and co-creation with God, also the third concept, mutual gift, you'll see go through this. I want to just review a bit John Paul II's, the track record he had, or the evidence that he had a passionate interest in sexuality, in defending the Church's teaching on marriage and sexuality, really throughout his whole professional life, his whole priesthood, and his whole pontificate. He wrote a large number of essays. Just here are two of them. One's in French, and another is in a set of essays, Person and Community Selected Essays. There are a very large number of John Paul II's writings on moral theology that have never been translated into English. And if anybody has a lot of money or access to someone with a lot of money, this would be a very good way to use your money, is to pay somebody who would translate all of these into to English. So throughout the 1950s, well into the 60s and 70s, John Paul II wrote a large number of essays on moral theology. The preponderance of those are in a certain sense directed towards understanding the Church's teaching on sexuality. His major work, again, that I'm going to draw upon here is Love and Responsibility, published in 1960, which I've taught several times. I'm, again, writing a book that will be including a lot on love and responsibility. And I think it's a brilliant text. I think it's every bit as brilliant as Theology of the Body, and perhaps a bit unfortunately neglected. His book, The Acting Person, it said that this book, published in 1979, was really to defend love and responsibility, to go a step deeper into his understanding of human action that was already initially laid out to some extent in Love and Responsibility. So we're going to go backwards a little bit here and go through some major documents that he had influence on. One was Gaudium et Spes in 1965, the document in the Church on the role of the Church in the modern world of Vatican II. John Paul II is said to be a major author of that document. And if you read sections 47 through 51, which are on marriage, we'll look at some of those passages. It's very clear that the language of John Paul II is there. And it's very clear, as Dr. Finnis said last night, that Gaudium et Spes had an enormous impact on the content of Humanae Vitae. So John Paul II influenced the content of Humanae Vitae through his writings and his thoughts that came into Gaudium et Spes. Humanae Vitae came out in 1968. And again, there's all sorts of evidence that John Paul II had major influence on the writings, on the content of that document. These are some of the evidence, the kinds of evidence, the kind of influence that he had. As some of you know, there was a special commission that was advising Pope Paul VI on the writing, prior to his writing Humanae Vitae. And Karol Wojtyła was a member of that commission, though he was never able to go to Rome to meet with that commission. He was able to go to Rome to be one of the members of the Vatican II Council, but not to meet with this special commission. The communist government, Poland, would not permit him to leave Poland for that purpose. But there were reports that came out of that special commission which recommended that the Church could and should change its teaching on contraception. I'll be happy to post for you. There we go. Okay. I'm just a really beautiful woman, but pictures are just horrible. So I don't like to be caught mid grimace, as they usually seem to do with me. So these reports came out of the special commission and went to John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła, in Krakow, and he established his own commission to respond to the reports that came out of the commission, the reports that said that the Church could and should change its teaching on contraception. He put together a commission that wrote a wonderful response to those documents defending the Church's teaching. That has never been translated and published in English. We're working on getting that done. George Weigel, in his biography of John Paul II, says that he believes it's a better document than the document than Humanae Vitae. I don't think he's right about that. At one time I thought so too, but now that I read them more carefully, I really think Humanae Vitae is a better document. But it's a better document because it had access to Karol Wojtyła's report that came out of the special commission. And the concept of conscious parenthood that I'm dealing with today was very highly featured in these, we call them the Krakow papers, or the Krakow report. Again, I mentioned he wrote many scholarly articles on Humanae Vitae during the 1960s. He wrote a rousing defense of Humanae Vitae in 1969, entitled The Truth of the Encyclical Humanae Vitae. He wrote a stirring defense of Humanae Vitae, and you have to read both of them to know the difference between a rousing and stirring defense. But he wrote a stirring defense of Humanae Vitae on the occasion of the 10th year anniversary of Humanae Vitae, Fruitful and Responsible Love. And he wrote a scholarly article for the journal Laterianum, the Anthropological Vision of Humanae Vitae, in 1978, which you can find on the internet. Immediately upon becoming Holy Father, all right, that's the next slide. Holy Father, this is a bold kind of statement, but I suspect that one of the reasons that when the Holy Spirit was looking around for the next cardinal to become the Holy Father, I think he landed on John Paul II, in great part because there was no other churchman, and possibly no other person on the face of the earth, who was better able to defend Humanae Vitae than John Paul II was, right? So I think it was no mistake that John Paul II, who had a passionate commitment to the Church's teaching on contraception and sexuality, was chosen to be Holy Father. Immediately upon becoming Holy Father, he convened a synod on the family. And as a result of that synod, he published the exhortation called Familiaris Consortio, which again has a fantastic defense of the Church's teaching on marriage, sexuality, and contraception. And of course, he delivered his Theology of the Body talks from 1979 to 1984, which were explicitly written in order to give a biblical foundation for the Church's teaching on contraception. It explicitly said that this whole series of talks was meant to be a defense of Humanae Vitae. And now we know from Michael Waldstein's marvelous translation and introduction, he had actually wrote the whole thing before he became Holy Father, right? And he took on the occasion of becoming Holy Father to deliver it piecemeal in his Wednesday audiences. We also have the great document Veritatis Splendor, which only marginally mentions contraception, but believe me, when it came out in 1993, everybody thought it was about contraception because it was reiterating the Church's constant teaching that there were intrinsically evil acts. And it was the issuing of Humanae Vitae that began the great dissent in the Church, which very much was claiming that there were no such things as intrinsically evil acts. So Veritatis Splendor, in a sense, was slamming the door shut of the great dissent that had begun with Humanae Vitae. Then in 1995, he issued Evangelium Vitae, and on the 5th anniversary of Evangelium Vitae, he said, I also greet all of you, participants in this reflection, on a document which I consider central to the whole of my magisterium, of my pontificate, and in thematic continuity with the encyclical Humanae Vitae of Pope Paul VI of venerable memory. Right? So he saw Evangelium Vitae, I mean, obviously even the title, to some extent, echoes Humanae Vitae, is meant to be an encyclical that builds upon Humanae Vitae. And again, Dr. Finnis last night spoke about how there were various predictions in Humanae Vitae of what would be what would happen, the bad consequences that would happen should Humanae Vitae be ignored and contraception become widely used. And as he mentioned, Evangelium Vitae spells out those consequences, which were even much worse than Pope Paul VI could have predicted. John Paul II also, wherever he went in the world, right, he's either getting on a plane or getting off a plane, which he was doing most of the time during his pontificate, visiting the world, and wherever he went, he gave talks on natural family planning, on contraception, on the family and sexuality. Again, if you go to the Vatican's website and look at the talks that he gave in the places that he visited, there's always a talk on natural family planning, the family, contraception. He also set up institutes all over the world. He wanted one on every continent. So these are the institutes for marriage and family that were set up during his pontificate. That's how central it was. And I found this very interesting passage by Pope Benedict XVI on the anniversary of the founding of the Pope John Paul II in Rome. He's saying, the beginning of your institute is connected with a singular event. On that day, 13 May 1981, my beloved predecessor, John Paul II, suffered the well-known serious attack on his life during the audience at which he was to have announced the creation of your institute. So Benedict is suggesting there was some diabolical attack on Pope John Paul II, possibly because of the hatred of Satan for the family, right? That he was going after John Paul II for that. It's a remarkable little sideline statement. All right, we're going to go into love and responsibility. We're going to go back to that work and take a close look at what he's doing there. In this work, his first concern is to figure out what to do with the sexual urge. He said everybody has sexual desires, right? What are we supposed to do with those? So he says the subject of analysis in the first place is the person as affected by the sexual urge. And he observes that really in a certain sense, our first response to the sexual urge is that we believe we are going to get some pleasure for ourselves, right? It's sort of driven by a self-referential desire to experience a certain pleasure. How do we turn that into a part of a loving, self-giving relationship? That's what he would call the problematic of love and responsibility. How do we take something that appears on the surface, at least, to be something selfish and turn it into, which he calls actually the raw material of love. How do we take that raw material and turn it into love? And he says, he asks this question, does not a woman constitute for man in the sexual relationship something like a means to the various ends which he seeks to attain within that relationship? Doesn't the sexual urge tend to make us want to use another person for our own ends? Again, how do I move from that to wanting to be in a relationship of self-gift rather than using the person? He expands. Women use men. He says, equally, does not a man constitute for a woman the means towards the attainment of her own aims? So again, both men and women initially are sensing that I'm going to get something out of this relationship. How do we turn that around and say, I have something to give? And throughout this book, he talks about the difference between using and loving, and he says it's absolutely wrong to use persons. He says, and the reason for that is that we are self-determining creatures. He says, every person is by nature capable of determining his or her aims. Anyone who treats a person as the means to an end does violence to the very essence of the other, to what constitutes its natural right. It's all right for us to use computers and cars and phones as instruments of use, because that's what they are. They are designed to be used by us. They are not free. They cannot decide how they want to be used or the future of their own destinies. Whereas human beings are free, and by our very nature, we're meant to determine our own destinies. So if we use another person, we are violating the very nature of that person. We're violating that person's right to be treated as a person. And he tells us that the right way to use persons is to love, not to use persons, but the right way to respond to persons is to love them. He says, and he calls it the personalistic norm. He says this norm, in its negative aspect, states that a person is the kind of good which does not admit of use and cannot be treated as an object of use and as such the means to an end. In its positive form, the personalistic norm confirms this. The person is a good towards which the only proper and adequate attitude is love. So he said, if there's a fundamental principle that you need to use things or treat things or respond to things in accord with their nature, the only right way to respond to human beings is with love, because that's what their nature requires. So he's going to talk here about various stages of love. Again, how we move from the sexual urge being fundamentally selfish to the love and marital relationship being primarily a relationship of gift to the other. He talks about different I've already mentioned the phrase, raw material of love. He says there's various, again, sort of stages of love, kinds of relationships. He said first people experience attraction. That attraction can move to desire. For males, largely, that desire is a desire for sensual pleasure. The desire on the part of the woman is largely for some sentimental or emotional satisfaction. I'm going to talk more about each one of these. He talks about the necessity of the attraction becoming reciprocal, that you can't just have a one-sided love relationship. You have to show an interest in each other. And that reciprocal interest has to become what he calls sympathy. I'll explain these terms. It then has to move to goodwill or friendship, and then eventually, if all of those stages are negotiated successfully, you will then move to betrothed love or really marital love. The first stage is what he calls attraction. That's part of the movie Dan in Real Life. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of cute. Again, the two of them meet in a bookstore, and they're just really attracted to each other. And the question is, well, do we make another step? Do we get phone numbers or not, right? They do get phone numbers at the end, and of course Dan finds out that this girl is actually dating his brother, which becomes an obstacle to the next stage, right? And this is often going to happen, that we're going to be attracted to people, and we find out that there's an obstacle to moving to the next stage, and the attraction has to, in a sense, just kind of disappear, because the next stage may or not be, she might have been married for all he knew. So you can be attracted to someone, but that certainly doesn't mean a next step has to be taken. But again, John Paul II says this is a raw material of love, that it's this desire, sexual desire, and desire to know the person. It accompanies this. It gets us to get up and walk across the room and talk to a person, right? It pulls us across the room. It says, oh, I want to go talk to that person. He said if you clear away some obstacles, their desire might kick in. It's not just that you're attracted to this person, but now again you're going to make a contact. You're going to try to pursue this person. So it's not just you're attracted, you find them attractive, and you might not say anything, might not do anything. It could happen all day long. You find people attracted. It's not going to happen. But sometimes you're going to say, but get the phone number, right? So then it moves to desire. Then he says for men, largely the initial attraction is very sensual. It has to do largely with the physical features and the physical pleasures that are going to come. I'm going to move quickly through this next slide. We don't want to be the occasion of sin, right? Then he says women are much more attracted to sentimentality, to the emotions that they feel in this relationship, the sense of closeness and being cared for and having attention paid to them. I don't know how many of you have read Madame Bovary. There's a couple books you should read, everybody should read in their lifetime, and certainly one of them is Madame Bovary, right? Because this is about a woman who gets completely caught up in kind of the whole subjective side of romance. She reads romance novels, and which is really sort of feminine porn, where your head is just being filled with dreams and fantasies rather than reality. And so John Paul II says in both of these cases, men and women, they can hardly get to know the other person at all because they're so caught up with the delight that they're experiencing that they're not making a test to see whether what's going on subjectively, what's going on inside of them, all the good feelings they're having, whether those feelings really line up with the person that's out there. Oh, she has such smooth skin. She must be kind, generous, nurturing, right? He has such broad shoulders. He must be decisive, responsible, protective, etc., right? The question, do you find out whether or not that's true? And this is what John Paul II says. You have to keep going back to the objective reality. Keep going back to the objective reality and seeing, are the things that I think are true about this person, are they really true? Right? It's a huge part of the process for him. He talks about reciprocity. Again, you can't just be admiring each other from a distance. You have to establish a relationship where you have a mutual interest in each other. And then this is a hugely important next stage, which he calls friendship or goodwill, where the point is if you really love this person, you want what is best for this person, right? And sometimes you're not best for that person, right? Sometimes you're not best for that person. This is a marvelous little movie. It uses the F word way too often, but if you can get past that, it's a marvelous little movie about a young man who's a street musician in Dublin, and his girlfriend has just left him, and he's singing all these woeful love songs, etc. And another young woman from Prague who's there in Dublin sees him, and she's a classical musician, and they kind of link up with each other. They very clearly are falling in love. But she's had a child by another man, and she decides that she really wants to be faithful to that relationship because she has a child, even though it's not going that well. And both of them have to decide that even though they're falling in love with each other, it's not good. It's not good for them to pursue that relationship because they have other commitments. And he goes back to his first girlfriend to see if he can work it out. But anyway, the point here is that in sort of getting to know each other and really sort of falling in love with each other, they decide that actually their love for the other person and other people in their lives means that they can't pursue this friendship, right? So at this whole process of going through this period of falling in love, you have to finally decide, I really love this person, and really love means that I need to want what is best for this person, and I have to ask, is this relationship what is best for this person? If it's not, it has to end, right? And then he talks about betrothed love. I believe that I think Hindus still have a ceremony of betrothal, which is really prior to marriage, where it's not quite our engagement ceremony, it's much stronger than that. You've actually made a lifetime commitment before you actually get married, and John Paul II talks about that, but that how it's absolutely natural to love and essential to love that it make a lifetime commitment. That if you really love a person, you want to again do what's right for this person, do what's best for this person, and for love really to thrive, to have the soil in which true love can really grow, it has to say, I'm here for you and I'm here for you always, right? So it's natural for it to move to a lifetime commitment. Now, as I've said, he talks about the need for objectivity, and he says we always have to be keeping in mind the object of my desire is a person, right? And a person should never be used, certainly not by me, right? So you always want to respect this person. If this person has dreams, desires, goals, relationships, commitments in life that you're not compatible with, you can't be a part of that relationship. And this person deserves, I'm sorry for the spelling typo there, deserves to be loved. And the other truth that he says must absolutely govern your sexual deliberations, if you will, deliberations about sexuality, is to keep in mind that sex leads to babies. For a long time I've wanted this tattooed on everyone's forehead, right? I think an enormous amount of evil in this world would be bypassed if we all kept in mind. Maybe we could at least wear t-shirts. Sex leads to babies. And he says we always have to be thinking when we're thinking about pursuing a sexual relationship is, am I ready to be a parent, right? And is this other person ready to be a parent? Otherwise, we shouldn't be engaging in this act. And are we ready to be parents together? Now, that's only a minimal part of what conscious parenthood means, but that's one of the core elements of what he calls conscious parenthood. Conscious parenthood means always remembering that sex leads to babies. And not just babies, but parenthood, right? Parenthood. Meaning I'm going to be a parent, and this person is going to be a parent, and are we ready to be parents with each other? He also talks, as I mentioned earlier, about this phrase, co-creators with God. I'll do a little Latin for those of you who are working on Latin. He uses the Latin phrase, which appears in St. Thomas quite a bit, particeps creatoris, a participant in creation, one who shares in creation. Now, the church documents talk quite a bit about spouses, parents being something, as I mentioned, look at the next row, cooperators with God, collaborators with God, or co-workers with God. Vatican magisterial documents never use the phrase co-creator, right? So John Paul II does, well, at least it's translated in English as co-creator, whatever the word that he uses in Polish. I'll get that in a minute. Now, some people don't like the word co-creator because only God creates. Only the word to create means to bring something out of nothing. We're always making something out of stuff that already exists. We have pre-existing material out of which we make something. But only God makes something out of nothing. He made the whole universe out of nothing. There weren't pre-existing materials. Somebody had to make those pre-existing materials, and God would have made those. So at some point, something, and that would be God, has to make the first materials that ever exist that can be the materials for everything else that exists. So God makes something out of nothing. But I took the text to a Polish priest, a friend of mine who's a philosopher, and looked at the word in Polish that was translated as co-creator, and I said, is co-creator a good translation of this word? And he said, actually it is, but what it really means is co-artist, right? The word is that God is kind of the ur-artist, the original artist, the one who takes material and creates something beautiful. And that man is a co-artist with him, right? Which I think is a much better word than cooperator, collaborator, co-worker. I mean, if you cooperate, it largely means you're not resisting, right? But there's much more to this than not resisting. Or if you're a collaborator, it's sort of like a work that you have to do, and again, you're working alongside someone that's kind of a work you have to do. Same with co-worker. With being a co-artist, that very much captures the notion that you're doing something wonderfully new, right? Wonderfully new, and there's a contribution of both in the creativity of what is going on. Now, obviously, life, God's the primary source, but He's inviting man to be a participant in His creation. So just a little picture of God creating, in case you haven't seen one for a while. There's really something marvelous about this. I mean, just the dynamism and the motion and that. But of course, it's an old God, and God's not old. God's ever ancient, ever new. But surely God's the youngest thing that ever is now, was always, will always be. That's why they make him old, but he's ever new. Again, spouses are meant to be co-creators with God. Adam and Eve. This is the lifeline of life tree of Jesus Christ. But all of us are bound together. But human beings are the source of new life, and that God is creating a whole universe of souls. And in Love and Responsibility, he has a chapter called Justice to the Creator. And he talks about God gave us the gift of sexuality. He gave us everything. And among the great gifts he gave us was the gift of sexuality. And we need to use that as God would have us use it, right? We owe him that we give back to him these gifts that he's given to us. He says, first of all, we are, in fact, reproducing a species. And as Dr. Finnis said last night, it's particularly important that we do so now because there's so many countries that are, as we call it, in a demographic free fall. If you haven't seen the DVD Demographic Winter, I recommend it. Though there's many good sources on the fact that there's not a single country in Western Europe that's reproducing itself, and they're basically paying. Many of those countries are basically paying people to have children. He says, so it's an important thing that we reproduce the species. And he says, he says that he uses a great phrase. He says that when you have a child, he says, you join the great cosmic stream of existence. And most spouses will tell you at some point, they said, yeah, we did, right? The species is now going on. We participated in that. It came down to us, and we passed it on, and that's a good thing. But even more importantly, way more importantly, is that we're generating a new human being, someone with an immortal soul, someone that has an eternal destiny with God, right? And you've given someone an inestimable good, life. There's no greater good that you can give someone than you give them life, because they have the opportunity of eternal life. And he says you're doing justice to the Creator who made the order of nature and who wants souls. This is why God gave us our sexuality. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's what he told us, right? And he wants souls. And God says, I'm choosing man and woman. Man and woman have made a lifetime commitment, lovers. He said, I want them to be lovers. He said, because I'm love, and I want my new souls to be the result of love, and I want them to come into a loving relationship. And basically what God wanted to create were lovers. He wants us to love and be loved. That's the personalistic norm that John Paul II is talking about. The right response to every human being is love. And so we're doing right to God when we're having babies. And then he says there's a justice to your Creator, to your beloved, who deserves to be treated with love rather than being sexually exploited, and who deserves to be honored as a potential parent. We're talking about this in a minute, but the idea that to bestow parenthood on another person is a great gift if you know what you're doing. Again, if you're conscious of what you're doing. You are making a lifetime commitment to this person by having a child with this person, right? And you're giving them the opportunity to bring into existence a new human soul. And that's a phenomenal gift to bestow. You're making a self-gift that brings other gifts to this person. In Gaudium et Spes, we start to see this being laid out. He says, marriage and conjugal love are by their nature ordained toward the begetting and educating of children. Children are really the supreme gift of marriage and contribute very substantially to the welfare of their parents. You want something meaningful to do with your life? Have a child, right? It's a great gift, right? You don't have to spend your life in trivialities and diversions and stupid things. You can bring forth a new human being that you have great meaning in your life. It contributes very substantially to the welfare of their parents in many ways. He talks about sharing the creative work of God. He says, the God himself who said it is not good for man to be alone, and the God who made man from the beginning male and female, wishing to share with man a certain participation in his own creative work, blessed male and female, saying, increase and multiply. So we have in Gaudium et Spes this phrase that man's a participant in God's creative work. We saw that word particeps creatoris. We're going to help build God's family, Gaudium et Spes tells us. It says, hence, while not making the other purposes of matrimony of less account, the true practice of conjugal love and the whole meaning of the family life which results from it have this aim, that the couple be ready with stout hearts to cooperate with the love of the Creator and the Savior, here again we have our cooperating with God, the Creator, as what spouses are meant to do, who through them will enlarge and enrich his own family day by day. In Evangelium Vitae we read, by speaking of a certain special participation of man and woman in the creative work of God, the Council wishes to point out that having a child is an event which is deeply human and full of religious meaning, insofar as it involves both the spouses who form one flesh and God who makes himself present. So we're going to have the mother and father who provide the fleshly elements of the new human being, and God who provides the soul. In his letter to families, he says, when a new person is born of the conjugal union of the two, he brings with him into the world a particular image and likeness of God himself. The genealogy of the person is inscribed in the very biology of generation. In affirming that the spouses as parents cooperate with God the Creator in conceiving and giving birth to a new human being, we are not speaking merely with reference to the laws of biology. Instead, we wish to emphasize that God himself is present in human fatherhood and motherhood quite differently than he is present in all other instances of begetting on earth. Indeed, God alone is the source of that image and likeness which is proper to the human being, as it was conceived at creation. Begetting is the continuation of creation. Right? Again, when God creates new human souls, he does what he did at the beginning of the universe. He makes something out of nothing. He doesn't make a new soul out of pre-existing material, right? He doesn't recycle souls. Every human being has a fresh soul, an absolutely new, unique, and individual soul made by God himself, right? That God infuses in the conceptus, right? That the parents have provided. So God and the spouses are cooperators. Spouses, again, are cooperators with God in his act of creation. So, just in case you forgot what creation looks like, ponder that for a moment. That's you, right? That's not just Adam, but that's you. God created each and every soul individually. Then we read, God willed man from the very beginning, and God wills him in every act of conception and every human birth. God wills man as a being similar to himself as a person. This man, every man, is created by God for his own sake. That is true of all persons, including those born with sicknesses or disabilities. Inscribed in the personal constitution of every human being is the will of God, who wills that man should be, in a certain sense, an end unto himself. So God wills each one of us individually into existence. Again, the male provides the sperm, the female provides the ovum, and God provides the human soul. Right? So, these are the elements of conscious, or these are some of the sources for this phrase, conscious parenthood. We talked about love and responsibility. As I mentioned, it's a very dominant concept in these Krakow papers that Karol Wojtyła sent to Pope Paul VI when he was writing Humanae Vitae. In the letter to families in section 12, it's all about conscious parenthood. But the phrase is translated by myself and others badly, I've determined, in Humanae Vitae as responsible parenthood. We've all heard that phrase, responsible parenthood. Now, I think English speakers generally understand responsible parenthood to mean two things. One is that we perform our duties of being parents well, or that we manage our family size well. Right? But those concepts are there in John Paul II's notion of conscious parenthood. But they aren't the predominant meanings of conscious parenthood. Okay, what are those meanings? We're working on it here. He says, when a man and woman, this is from Love and Responsibility, when a man and woman capable of procreation have intercourse, their union must be accompanied by awareness and willing acceptance of the possibility that I may become a father or I may become a mother. Sexual union is raised to the level of the person only when it is accompanied in the mind and the will by acceptance of the possibility of parenthood. Right? Again, can you imagine how radically sexual behavior would change in our world if people were conscious of the fact that they may become parents through this act? So these are the elements of conscious parenthood. It's being aware that sex leads to having babies, right? It's accepting and preparing for that consequence. Right? It's accepting that consequence as a good for the child, for spouses, society, and God. He talks about all of these in love and responsibility. And you've given the child a gift of life. You've given spouses a lifetime relationship, a meaningful thing to do. You've given children to society, to be members of society, to make their contribution. And you've provided another citizen for God's kingdom. All of that, he means in conscious parenthood. You should be aware that becoming a parent does this, all right? It means being ready to be a parent, right? That if you're going to be engaging in sex, you're ready to be a parent. And you need to choose a spouse who will be a good parent. And he actually almost uses the language, not quite so much, but you shouldn't inflict parenthood on someone who is not ready. That's not loving to that person. If you love a person, you want the best for that person. If that person's not ready to be a parent, you shouldn't be having sex with that person, because you're inflicting a huge responsibility on a person who's not ready for it. Other passages, he says, the proper way for a person to deal with a sexual urge, there's two proper ways. One, on the one hand, consciously to make use of it for its natural purposes, become a parent. And on the other hand, to resist it when it threatens to degrade the relationship between persons to a lower level than that of love, lower than the level on which the value of the person is affirmed in a union with a truly personal character. For John Paul II repeatedly says that the act of sexual intercourse should never use another person. It should always affirm another person. It should always affirm another person, saying, I love you, I care for you, I seek your happiness. And that would mean you'd never be having sex with this person unless you were prepared to be a parent with this person, right? He says sexual marital relations have the character of a true union of persons, as long as a general disposition towards parenthood is not excluded from them. This implies a conscious attitude to the sexual instinct. To master the sexual urge means just this, to accept its purpose in marital relations. He says, if the possibility of parenthood is deliberately excluded from marital relations, if the couple is contracepting, the character of the relationship automatically changes. The change is away from unification in love and in the direction of mutual, or rather bilateral, enjoyment. Right? That you're just using each other, right? You're using each other rather than giving of yourself to each other when you're contracepting. I'm hoping that this slide gives you a visual image of the difference, all right? That when couples are contracepting, it's a very momentary act. It's very sensuous. It can be, in our culture, often is anonymous. Certainly implies no lifetime, no long time, maybe even no momentary commitment beyond this momentary act of sexual intercourse. To say, I want to have sex with you, which is what contraceptive sex says. I want to have sex with you. I want to enjoy this great pleasure with you. Makes no commitment at all. But if you don't use contraceptives, you're always leaving the very deep orientation of the sexual act towards children remains there in the act. It remains there. And so you're always saying with this act, I'm willing to be a parent with you, right? I'm willing to be a parent with you. If anybody, I always often tell my students, not my seminarians, because they shouldn't be thinking this direction, but when I had students who were thinking of marrying, I said, don't be too impressed if someone comes up to you and says, I want to have sex with you. Don't be too impressed. They just could be saying, I want to enjoy this momentary sexual pleasure with you. But if someone comes up to you and says, I want you to be the mother or the father of my children, you should fall over, right? You should fall over. That's a marriage proposal, right? And it's an incredible thing to say. I'm going to be there for breakfast, PTA, right? Braces, wedding, all right? We're going to grow old together, right? It's and non-contraceptive sex says, I'm willing to be a parent with you. That's what it says. That's what John Paul II talks about, the language of the body. The contracepting body says one thing, a non-contracepting body says another. Again, babies are bonding. It takes 23 male chromosomes and 23 female chromosomes to make a baby. And if love is meant to be a union of two persons, obviously that child is a very a great manifestation of that desire to become a union, to have become one through their child. And again, he talks about it, having children with another as being this affirmation of the person. He says this acceptance or parenthood is so important, so decisive, that without it, marital intercourse cannot be said to be a realization of a personal relationship. Neither in the man nor in the woman can affirmation of the value of the person be divorced from the awareness and willing acceptance that he may become a father and she may become a mother. Right? The day that a husband and a wife get their first positive pregnancy test is generally one of the very happiest days of their life. Right? In our culture that's kind of anti-baby, sometimes it's not. But in the history of mankind, generally the day that they get their first positive pregnancy test, it's unbelievable joy. Right? We finally started our family. Again, we have really bonded now. Right? If we thought we had a commitment before, boy, do we have one now. Right? This means we have to stick together for the rest of our lives because we're having a baby, right? And this baby deserves two parents who love each other. And so the whole having of a baby is this huge affirmation of this lifetime commitment that is the nature of a love relationship. John Paul II talks about the family as being crucial to the civilization of love. He says, if the first way of the church is the family, it should also be said that the civilization of love is also the way of the church, which journeys through the world and summons families to this way. It summons also other social, national, and international institutions because of families and through families. The family, in fact, depends for several reasons on the civilization of love and finds therein the reasons for its existence as family. And at the same time, the family is the center and the heart of the civilization of love. That we're going to learn to live this personalistic norm, to love others and to care for others, and to care for what's best for others first in the family. And then it is going to spread to the rest of the civilization. And this is just a picture of one of my goddaughters. She's the one in the wheelchair. Emily has cerebral palsy. And these are friends of mine who now have 6 children. And she's an adopted child, and they want to adopt other disabled children. The others are their natural-born children, but that's the civilization of love, and they live it in a very radical way. That's my family. That's my father and my mother on their 50th wedding anniversary. That was 11 years ago. But that's the spreading of the love in this world, that from 2 people come a large body of other lovers who are meant to spread that love in this world. All right, we're done now, and I'm ready for any questions you might have. Thank you. I'll leave that there.
I enjoyed the presentation very much. I wonder why you use the term, or is the term used, not to use a person as a means to an end, rather than a means merely to an end.
Yeah.
Because it seems all of good relationships are using people as means, but not means merely.
Yes.
The very recognition of the obligation to increase and multiply is an obligation you can't do by yourself. And so husband and wife are means to each other, discharging the obligation. The Orthodox Jews understand you have children because it's a mitzvah. But it's a mitzvah, you can't do it by yourself. It takes 2 to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that context, each is using the other as a means, but not a means merely to pursue the love of God. So it seems to me that's very imprecise. Just as a footnote, in the Orthodox Church, in the ritual of marriage, there are 2 rituals, the betrothal and the marriage, and you can still, if the bishop will really trust you, have the betrothal done beforehand, and it will have about the same canonical implications as a marriage. So you don't have to go to pagans in India. You can go to Christians.
I very much welcome the corrective. In fact, John Paul II does use that phrase. He does say you should not use people merely as a means to an end. Right? I did speak imprecisely. But he said all the time you'll be using people to some extent as a means. So, your car mechanic, your grocery store clerk, your bank clerk. I mean, you're not entering into an I-thou relationship with those individuals. They are performing a function for you. But you should never use them merely as a means. You should.
When you say, I want you to be the mother of my children,
right.
That's means, not a means merely.
Right. There is even in the marital relationship, there is some element of using people as a means. But in many non-marital relationships, in a certain sense, that's almost primary, is a kind of using them as means. But you should always recognize that you're working with a person, right? And when the personal element may kick in, this person may start bleeding, all right? Whatever. You don't say, oh, I'll go to another bank clerk, all right? Or this person's, somebody might find that someone died in their family, so, well, I've got to go do something. But you treat them as a person, right, with love and respect. So you're absolutely right. The adverb merely should certainly be in that principle. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your wonderful talk, and I appreciate the corrective on conscious parenthood rather than responsible parenthood. That's very helpful. I wonder if you could give a suggestion for how we, or at least I, might go about dealing with a dispute, dealing with the claim that women tend to be more, their attractions tend to be more sentimental versus man's being more sensual, a dispute that I received very harshly when I spoke at Wellesley College on Catholic sexual teaching. So I'd appreciate some feedback on that.
That claim was
I didn't actually make the claim explicitly, but in some of what I was saying, some of the sort of more, I think, radical feminists in the room took issue with the idea that they weren't.
Was this men and women, or mostly women?
The ones who were taking the dispute were women. And it was at Wellesley College, a women's college. There were a couple of men in the room.
Yeah. Well, John Paul II, even in Love and Responsibility, he mentions that women are sometimes, especially that. So let me just step back. When I was teaching here at Notre Dame, I would sometimes be appalled at the young women who would sunbathe in bikinis, on the grass here, and not only just is it cruel to any man, but the priests who are on campus who are really trying to keep chastity, like, what the heck, And they'd say that, oh, it's their problem, it's their problem. The girls would say this, it's not my problem, it's their problem. And John Paul II says women need to be taught something about this. They need to be taught that their responsibility for helping men to achieve chastity, and they need to learn that men have a different response to physical stimuli.
So the claim is that men don't have a different response, or rather that women don't have a different response. These women are claiming that they have the same sexual urges and desires.
No, well, certainly women we both have sexual urges, but very powerful ones. But he says in women it starts, not that it stops there, but it starts more with the emotional desires, all right, to feel close, to feel treasured, etc. And then that moves into the desire for the physical and the sexual, because that supplements their desire to be treasured, loved, etc. And for men, it starts much more physically, and then it does move into the emotional, right? So they have different points of entry into the whole complex of the relationship, right? But that for the two of them to be aware of that can help them negotiate some of the potholes in building a relationship. That he is going to be most likely driving for much more physical pleasure, and she is most likely going to talk on the phone a whole lot more than he does, and go for long talks and walk and talk. And he says, "What's going on here?" Well, all she wants to do is talk, and she says, all he wants to do is make out. All right. Well, saying once you know that about each other, you understand that that's a difference in your gender, right? And so John Paul II says, and he says women are somewhat, especially young women, are oblivious, or at least pretend to be, that there's a difference between. My students would deny it.
I guess they're very aware that this is out there, that this idea of men and women having different sexual desires is out there and is sort of the traditional understanding, but they dispute it by their own experience. In fact, my reaction to them wasn't, I wish I'd had sort of some data with me, but my reaction was sort of looking at them and saying, so you're telling me that you daydream about the sexual act rather than cuddling. Yes, we daydream about the sexual act. I mean, it was, they really had, they felt the need to sort of become sort of the masculine rather than.
And that may well be right. I mean, it may be because honestly, they are sexually active. They have been for some time. And unfortunately, they might not have ever done a lot of cuddling, right? And so, unfortunately, they bypassed a whole stage of romance that was the romance of affect. John Paul II talks about this, and I should have put it in here, honestly. He talks about, because it comes later in the book, but he talks about the need for tenderness, right? And that tenderness is a touch of affection rather than a touch of sexual desire or arousal. And it's he says, women, he says, deserve tenderness, right? They deserve tenderness, and men need to learn how to give tenderness, right? And my suspicion, unfortunately, is many young women have started their sexual lives honestly with deviant acts of sexual pleasure, right? It's been all about someone else, right? The President Clinton's little activity, And the teenage girls are getting initiated into sexual activity this way. So then they've never had cuddling. I mean, holding hands, they don't have that. They move straight to sort of, again, deviant sexuality. And then maybe eventually they get into full-fledged sexuality. But it's not preceded by a long period of courting, romance, affection, tenderness. They don't know what they're missing because they've never had it. Right? So I would agree, probably their fantasies do go straight there, because unfortunately they've missed out on something. And I suspect at some point in their life, I mean, they're now talking about an epidemic of what they call sexless marriages, right? People have been married for 15 years or longer and are no longer having sex, right? And I think it's because sex has become somewhat meaningless. It doesn't express a deep commitment. It's not a part of a long, even couples who are married. I mean, they had sex before marriage. It didn't mean much. They've been contracepting. It doesn't mean much. Before long, it just doesn't mean much, right? Whereas couples who use natural family planning, people courted correctly, it always means a great deal. It's huge in its meaning, right? I give myself to you like I give myself to no one else. Well, people who've had sex before marriage, how can they say that? They can't say I give myself to you like I give myself to no one else, because they've given it away somewhat promiscuously, right? Now, it's not, again, luckily we belong to a church and we have a God and we have a Savior who heals us from these things. So people who've made these mistakes can be healed, but it takes a while. And some people don't even know that they need to be healed. So when they hear couples using natural family planning talk about sex and how, again, how it's this, we're best friends and we love each other and we give ourselves to each other, and the sex act is this great expression of our lifetime commitment. People, contraceptors, when most people have contracepted, most of their sexual acts have been contracepted. They look at them and they say, what the heck are you talking about? Sex is just sex. That's all it is, just sex. And if people say, no, it's not just sex. It's an expression of a lifetime relationship. It's like I say, well, what's that? Where do you get that? Right? Because we've been having sex for decades that didn't mean that. So I think you're right. We're talking with people who have very deformed experiences of sexuality. So some of this won't resonate with them. But what might resonate, I have a friend who teaches at an all-girls college, and she says she often talks to them about the emptiness they feel after sex, right? And how they feel that they have been used, and there's just something very seriously missing, right? That, yeah, it was fun, and yeah, it was pleasurable. But afterwards, it's like, there's some emptiness here. And she says she gets lights of recognition in the eyes right across the room. Yeah, there's something empty. There's a good book now by a woman named Dawn Eden called The Thrill of the Chaste, which is it's a really good book. And she was very promiscuous, and she, so kind of Sex in the City response to sexuality. And she talks about how it was all just filled with lies. She said that it was very clear that she was pretending to like the men more than they liked her. They were pretending to like her more than they really did. They were pretending that they had more of a commitment to each other than they did. And basically, after you're done having sex, you look at each other and say, now what do we do now, right? What do we talk about? We just engage in a very intimate act, but we barely know each other. So what do we do now? As opposed to having sex be a completion of the building of a very intimate relationship on the level of communication, trust, etc. Then when sex builds upon that, it's the proper expression of a relationship that's already been established, as opposed to preempting that whole process. Yes, go ahead. Oh, I think I have to go from mic to mic. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to comment on that question because I think that I don't have any data for you or anything, but I think what you could tell them is just try to be honest with yourself about what you do really want, and then actually talk to men and see what their reaction is. Because if you don't have any male friends, you do think it's probably the same. But then after you talk to them and then you're honest with yourself about what you want, you realize it's really different. And then you can't. That's not empirical proving, but I think it becomes pretty clear once people are honest and if they have an honest relationship. Then that's not an argument for them, but that's probably, if they actually did that, would be better than an argument or empirical data.
So thank you. That's very good advice. That often, again, that's what so much of the heartbreak is. I thought you meant this. I thought the fact that you were doing this meant you thought that, and you meant this, and it doesn't. So ask him, this is what I want out of this relationship. What do you want out of this relationship? And you might find they are worlds apart. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question regarding John Paul II's influence on Humanae Vitae.
Can you just speak a little bit?
Yep. I have a
I'm sorry.
question regarding John Paul II's influence on Humanae Vitae.
Yes.
It's been a while since I've read Witness to Hope by George Weigel, but it was my impression after reading that
My ears are bad and the mic is bad
sorry.
coming this way. I remember last night I could hear everything. I thought Professor Finn is not being able to hear. through the
Okay,
mic.
is this better? Does this
Can you
help?
take it down? I mean, take the mic out and just hand it to people. Yeah, good. No, I'll try.
Is this better?
We'll see.
Okay. Well, it's been a while since I've read Witness to Hope by George Weigel, but it was my impression after reading it that if Paul VI had better taken the advice of John Paul II and implemented more of this theology of the body that John Paul II was working out in Humanae Vitae, that it wouldn't have had such the explosive impact as it would have. And I was just wondering if you could say more about how, or more precisely about how John Paul II influenced Paul VI.
Yeah.
And then why is it that the reaction of Humanae Vitae in the 60s is substantially different to our reaction to John Paul II's theology of the body? Because they do really seem to me, when I read them, to be very different. And not contradictory, but
Sure.
it's hard to see John Paul II in Humanae Vitae.
No, well, I think honestly, I'll write my book and then you'll see it. It really is everywhere, and it's amazing how many people haven't read Humanae Vitae except already with a prejudice. I mean, Karl Rahner, in writing about Humanae Vitae, said that it's based entirely upon authority, right? And it's almost not based on authority at all when you read the document. And you're thinking, what did he read? And you're thinking, he's a major theologian, a major intellect, and somehow reading Humanae Vitae, he said something about it which I think is manifestly false. Right? So people come to Humanae Vitae with a whole set of expectations, and they read those expectations right into the document, as opposed to reading the document. Now, of course, John Paul II's theology of the body wasn't developed before Humanae Vitae, so Humanae Vitae couldn't reflect the theology of the body. I do think it's a magnificent work, and you don't know why certain arguments catch a population at a certain time. Possibly if Theology of the Body come out in 1968, it would have been much more successful, or not at all successful. It could have been that people weren't at all ready for the Theology of the Body in 1968. My suspicion is that they wouldn't have been, that something has happened in 40 years that has tilled the ground, that made the Theology of the Body much more amenable to people. And then you have a very gifted presenter and zealot presenter such as Christopher West. Some people don't like him, so then they start their own, and people like them. So you've got a phenomenon. You've got some people who have really taken this and gotten out there. There wasn't the circuit in 1968 that there is now, believe me. I mean, the number of places are having conferences and having speakers, etc. That wasn't happening. So again, other elements just besides the theology of the body, I think, has led to the theology of the body being so persuasive. So I do think in itself it's a brilliant presentation of the Church's teaching. Yes, sir.
Hello, Professor Smith. I'm a philosophy grad student, and I know the Pope was a great philosopher. And I want to know, to what degree can we make this case for conscious parenthood without reference to God? And how far can we do that? Can we do that?
Well, really, in Love and Responsibility, John Paul II is trying to do it on a philosophical basis. He's trying to leave the theology out of it as much as possible. Now, of course, he is one of these that believes that the existence of God can be proved, philosophically speaking. So any reference to God is not necessarily a religious reference, right, or one, at least a revealed, that you need a revealed theology in order to have reference to God. He thinks by the basis of philosophy you can prove that nature needed a creator, right, and that creator would be a God, and that he accepts Aristotle's position that religion is a natural virtue. Religion means that we need to give to God what is owed to God. And so even the whole phrase justice to the creator is an echo of Aristotle's understanding that religion is a relationship of justice to God, even though Aristotle doesn't have a notion of God as a creator. So this notion even of God as creator is a Christian element that has worked into John Paul II's work. But he tries as much as he can. He slips in, but usually pretty self-consciously, references to Christianity and a Judeo-Christian ethic in love and responsibility. But he wants to say it's an obvious fact that sex leads to babies. It's an obvious fact that babies are good, much greater good than dogs and cats, right? And deserve parents who have made a lifetime commitment to each other. He doesn't have, as we have, incredible sociological data that shows that babies that are raised in parenthood in households with parents who have made a lifetime commitment to meet that lifetime commitment are flourish much more than children who are raised by single parents or grow up in divorced households. So there would be all sorts of data that he could draw upon that's currently available that makes no reference to religion at all, let alone the data that does show that those who grow up in religious households with parents who go to church every Sunday, the children flourish much more. And that's a scientific data, right? Not about the truth of religion, but of the benefits of religion. So I think there's a lot that can be done separately from any reference. My most famous talk is Contraception, Why Not? Which blends both theology and social science data, really. I've got one version, though, of that talk. I think it's called Natural Sex is Best, or a Secular Contraception, I forget the name of it, but where I try to make an argument entirely without reference to anything to do with religion, and just simply from social science data. Thank you for the question. 5 more minutes? All right. Good. Mary's in control. Go ahead.
Professor Smith, I have 2 kinds of harder cases that I wanted to ask you about. One has to do with, let's say, a very faithful Catholic married couple, and suppose they're actually open. I mean, they would prefer, judging from, let's say they had many children, so they would want not to have another kid. So they use contraceptive, but they know that contraceptives don't work 100%. So they're saying, well, if we have a kid, we'll love them, we'll be happy, we're open to them. So why would those acts be immoral? And the second kind...
Okay, let's do the first one first.
Okay.
Okay, and then we might have to let someone else ask a question. So, well, one of the reasons I retranslated Humanae Vitae from the Latin text was because the very phrase that says each and every act must remain open to procreation. The word open is a translation of the Italian word aperto, whereas the Latin says per se destinatus, which is considerably different, that each act must retain its intrinsic ordination to procreation. It has nothing to do with the openness of the spouses, nothing to do with the openness. So I'm not saying that a couple who's adapting family planning and a couple who's contracepting they could both be equally closed to having a child, but the act of the contraceptor is an act where they're attempting to thwart any fertility that might be in that act. They are trying to make certain that fertility doesn't happen. Now, they might be accepting of children that might happen, but they say, we're doing our darndest to make this particular act a non-procreative act, right? We're willing to damage the fertility. We're willing to violate the fertility in order to achieve our ends, whatever they are. Whereas the couple who's using natural family planning are saying, we are not tampering with this act. We've done nothing to violate this act. Right? We're engaging in an act that has a diminished or reduced or maybe non-existent fertility. But we didn't create that situation, right? We're taking this act for the fullness that it has, right? So I'm not saying that they're psychologically more open. They both might say, we really don't want a baby right now. We really think a baby right now would not be a good thing for this household. But one of them is violating the very nature of the act. The other is respecting the nature of the act. So I'm going to have to let other people get a chance. Yes, sir.
Hi. I have a friend who's she's a woman trying to go into the medical field, and she understands what the church teaches on contraception, but she feels that because of the lack of availability she will have in this field, she can't start a family at this point.
Because of because of what she would have?
Because of residency and not being home for days or being home for very little time.
Because of residency?
Well, just the process of becoming a doctor. She wouldn't have time for her family. So
becoming a doctor. Okay, she's studying to be a doctor, and she wouldn't have time to have a child right now.
Right. And so how might you respond to a person like that in a tough situation? But
again, any woman who has decided that she has good reasons, and I'm assuming she's done this in consultation with God, she's prayed about it, And God has told her that, yeah, they're in agreement that it would be a good idea for her to have a child right now, for her to pursue what she's pursuing. It's much better for her to use natural family planning than contraception, right? Because using natural family planning, is especially as a doctor, she should know. Why would she want to put all those toxic chemicals in her body as opposed to using something that's perfectly natural? We're all going green, and natural family planning, again, is the best going green you can get. And as a doctor, she should look into really what contraceptives do to her physiology. Increased, possibility of breast cancer, all sorts of. I don't know how to make people. Johnson & Johnson just paid out $68 million in damages for the patch. All right, $68 million, and 30 women who filed. So some 562 women filed cases against Johnson & Johnson because of the patch, and 30 of them include deaths. Right, 30 of them include deaths. So I say, why not use natural family planning? Right, you'll live. You won't put all these toxic chemicals in your body, and if you use it well, you won't get pregnant. Right? So if a woman has a good reason not to get pregnant, natural family planning is the way to go. Yes, sir.
Hi, Dr. Smith. I'm just offering some information from the physiological research on the sexuality, female sexuality. You're probably aware, but some of the students may not be who asked the question, that Dr. Miriam Grossman, a psychiatrist at UCLA who works in the Student Counseling Center, wrote a book called Unprotected. And she uses the oxytocin argument that female sexuality and the female response to pleasure is very, very different and bonds very, very quickly. And so she offers the explanation that a young woman might have sex 2 or 3 times and be extremely bonded to a guy, and about 10 days later she realizes, I'm extremely bonded to this idiot. How do I get out of this situation? And Dr. Grossman argues that all the courtship in the culture is a construct that reflects the nature of that special kind of physiological bonding. So I recommend that to those looking for the answer. She also takes up in one of her chapters the question of that the young man just answered, the professional woman who has the difficult decision, a graduate student, a doctor, etc. And Dr. Grossman said, someone in the academic life, and it's usually only her mother, will tell the young woman that after those first 2 or 3 years of the 30s, the fertility goes down dramatically. And the chances of the artificial means to achieve a birth when one's 40 is usually, even with all kinds of medical interventions, is usually about 12%. And Dr. Grossman says after 10 years of counseling young women in a university, that message really has to get out, and political correctness prevents it from doing so. So that's just information. That's
good. Good. I have a talk called Hormones Are Us that go into a lot of those matters. Yes, Mary, are we ready to? We have one more. Should we let him have it, or what's your?
Mine was just a remark to the second question at Wellesley's students. Maybe you have to bite the bullet and say, at least as traditional Christians, we're gender essentialists. Both in Genesis and Matthew, we're created male and female. The biological world, people deficiently realize what it is to be male and female. So if you actually look at any phenomenon, you'll have a spread. There'll be clusterings that are different from males and females. But the message that traditional Christians bring is we're ontologically different. We're gender essentialists. And our biology more or less reflects that in the fallen world.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much.